KU.
Those are 3 young ladies.
Oh, well, you know,
Not just us guys.
they're not seasoned enough. It's too bad.
Oh,
Little troublemakers.
maybe they're too seasoned.
Yeah. So I didn't bring a printout to the back to this.
Which one have it here?
Let's see, this is not here, Steve, and
Actually,
yeah.
And so what do we? I remember last year, FinCom was up here. And you were right
yeah,
there.
we're meeting here now, and I think we're
Real quick.
And then clear the seats for FinCom.
Right. Yeah, the last one that Brian sent us, I was like, the funding wasn't in it at the end. That was interesting.
the one he sent out to
That one?
FinCon to me who had the funding.
Okay, good. I kind of just emailed him back. Like, hey, just not sure this is the last one. So I like made a couple formatting changes and sent him that back.
We're just going to wait just like another minute, and then we'll get going.
Is there anyone you're not expecting that? Or anyone?
No. No.
I got that. Oh, I didn't print it regardless. Oh, so that was good to go though. Funding and such.
I think we're going to call the meeting to order for December 19th for the Capital Committee, just to verbally approve our report, and if we have any other little questions or anything we can have for the Finance Committee meeting at 4. I had one question here. Let's see, where is it to start? Brian?
Yeah.
The upgrade to the wastewater lab, we had taken that out.
That should have said yes.
The 30 grand? So that should be, we should have done that in red, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's not in your numbers.
What's that?
It's not in your numbers.
Okay.
So you're fine.
Is that one that I emailed you about? I thought.
You did.
If
Yeah.
it was in there, not.
You did.
Yeah. I couldn't tell from the wording of it, but
Yeah. No,
it
you
kind
did.
of stuck out.
Yeah. And I think that was really all I had. So what we have here is we have the summary page, which gets the document started, our recommendations and then we have the funding sources, which Finance Department provided, which is helpful. Brian, does the Finance Committee at all get the outlook, the 10-year outlook? To what extent do they get that paperwork?
I don't know if we sent it in this, but we probably will. We'll send that to them.
Okay. I want to bring it up, so I just want to, not to really go over, but just kind of a few comments on it. And, yeah, Jim?
Are we being recorded?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I should have said that. So we're being filmed and recorded. Thanks, Jim. Anything that changed from the last meeting on any of this, on any of the paperwork, other than the stuff we all discussed? Pretty much is what it is.
2.4 million, the change.
Right.
Now.
Okay, I think we all know about that. Are there any questions on any items that anyone wants to bring up? I mean, as far as just something that town administration or finance department might be able to clarify, if there's any little item that may have come up? No? All right, that's good. Yeah, Jim?
I don't know if this is a tangent to your question, but I'm wondering if, are there any things we've heard or comments that have been made about the upcoming review by the Finance Committee that anybody wants to share to help Christie in his presentation?
Yeah. I will clarify one thing. I did talk to the school about the Bacchus Lane number, and Diane said they are optimistic they can work within that number.
Well,
Yeah, she said that a lot of the baseball field move around is going to be done in-house. So I've asked them to review the numbers to see what they're going to be looking at in out years, but she's optimistic they can stay within that number. And from then on, it would be just operating or managing the operating costs, managing the. But the whole project, she's optimistic will stay within that number, which is pretty good. Yeah.
So it just, so we did a very thoughtful review of the school projects.
Yeah.
And I think, as I understand, they bundled some of them because rather than having them by specific school, so you may get a question about that possibly. I'm just trying to predict some questions you might get.
Are you referring to the
School improvements, right?
$100,000 school improvement stuff?
times
They're,
three.
they're
Yeah.
just in general.
Yeah.
I think. So I'm just trying to give you some heads up on
Yeah,
some
it's-
things, perhaps.
Yeah, I get the understanding that they sort of allotted themselves that much, and they're doing work within that amount. And I know
Yeah.
from each school, those items slightly differ.
Right.
Within the
I'm
100,000.
just trying to
Yeah.
give you a little heads up on
No,
the
yeah,
questions
yeah.
you might get.
Yeah, it's probably.
Do we take some action on this? Or?
We will, yep. The item, Libby had sent the logbook from 2014 for the bucket truck. I don't know if you guys saw that. Was that just to me?
No, I sent
I didn't get-
12,
we didn't get
I sent 13, 14, and 15 to everybody. However, some of them came back because it's big.
It is big.
I didn't.
So if you didn't get it, it bounced
get it.
back to me, and I
Yep.
didn't have a chance to try to figure it out. So, and each logbook is about 60 pages or so.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what you want me to. I could try to figure out how to get it into a different sort of a format to get it to you. I'm sure there's something to do.
Yeah, Richard?
Did that logbook satisfy you, Peter?
I didn't receive it.
You didn't receive any?
But mine usually bounces
I,
back.
I took a look at some of the pages. And,
Yeah, it's
yeah, I mean, it does, it's basically a daily calendar, and it's got all the, did you look at it?
Yeah, I did. I
Yep.
saw 2014.
that's what I looked at.
It's clearly not what we're looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of it's a diary with, here's what we did today.
Location.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers and circles were. I didn't know if that was
Hours or something?
no, because they were almost in successive order, but they skipped a couple days here and there where they didn't log anything, but it wasn't perfectly consistent. So, but yeah,
Let's just start.
It's a
yeah.
start.
I didn't see 15 though.
Yeah. So as we go forward, we'll further review that. We're just going through, if there's any little questions you have or any questions for the presentation, clarifications. We haven't approved it yet.
Okay,
Just
cool.
still kind of
I
discussing it.
apologize, I was upstairs with our Island Home Work Group. So. I have a couple of,
Yeah.
but they're not like, you have to change, suggesting changes within the document, but just to point out.
Yeah, if go ahead, have at it.
One's a quick question. Brian, you clarified for me back on Friday, seems so long ago. Brian, there he is.
I don't know what I did yesterday, so
That the wastewater lab had been 30,000, had been
it's
moved
gonna be in their budget, yeah.
to operating?
Yeah.
That's still in the,
It might be in the Excel, I don't know, I think that it might have been inadvertently left in the Excel sheet.
okay, it is in the Excel, just so you're aware.
Yeah.
We talked about moving and operating, and then in our report,
It's
I just wanted you to be aware that if it's in operating, if someone asks, that's one of the things that moved to operating. The other thing that moved to operating was under Facilities Department, the 2 Fairgrounds Road ADA improvements, $25,000.
Yep.
So again, just, some of them say these were moved to operating. And you did a great job with this. I'm just kind of fine tuning.
Yeah.
If
No,
I may.
it's-
The ADA stuff's not in the Excel report, so that's just an internal to,
Yeah, the ADA is not just the wastewater lab.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
So just, if,
Yep.
who knows how closely anyone's going to look at this,
Right.
but if you
Yeah,
could-
some of that stuff that's out, I left in for discussion purposes to, you know,
Let them know.
yep.
And then the other thing I picked up, again, this is just, being dot the Ts, dot the Is and cross the Ts. We looked at RLN home draft mitigation and management, and just so that there's continuity, if it comes up in a question, in the Excel report, it's still windows and shingling, or trim and shingling.
Yeah.
In the wastewater lab, and under want to comment water,
Mm-hmm.
there's just an entry, it says funding
Sorry.
at the very end.
Funding.
Was this part of, I wasn't sure what that was.
This needs to-
So that's the older document. That should be section 3 where the finance department actually put in their funding spreadsheets.
Okay.
Oh, which are on the back.
There's an updated document
So
that
that-
includes all of the different
Yeah,
funding
so that's the
sources.
insert.
it's-
Okay,
yeah.
cool, thank you, just so I had it. And then I just wanted to reiterate that our suggestions, that we have a few additional questions is not limited to these questions. These are examples as opposed to specifics in what Peter had worked on.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
It looks great.
I got a question for the committee. So for the for the Ireland home, Matt, we would recommend it 150. Does anyone recall how we arrived at that, if they ask? I'm just wondering, I think we had thought that initial number was a little excessive, but I just,
I
not,
think
yeah, Jim?
I think we relied with the expertise in our committee that have specific experience
Yeah.
in building trades.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Well,
Is the FinCom meeting here or upstairs?
yeah, it's right here. Yeah. Well, I think I'm all set. If everyone's good, we can approve, vote to approve the document.
I make a motion to approve the recommendations as written with the inserts from town finance.
Second?
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Brian, is there anything we need to know going in, or pretty much we don't know till they ask, right?
No, I'm not sure.
All right.
I think you're well prepared.
Yeah, okay. It'll be fine.
Okay.
If I don't know a question, I'll probably refer to either the committee or if the committee member knows it, by all means, raise your hand. Any deep finance questions, I might go to you. That's right. So they're going to be in about 10 minutes, so motion to adjourn? Oh, what?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you want to adjourn because, or do you want to be in session?
Oh, yeah, we should stay in session. Yeah.
Recess?
Yeah, what do we, recess? Is that right?
It's captivating.
What's that?
It's captivating.
Well, it's probably better not to. Yes, you can recess till 12.
Okay. All right, motion to recess till 4.
So made and seconded.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, great.
So we're gonna have to vacate it.
Yeah.
You know. Are these typically well-attended meetings?
Yeah, I don't think last year there was more than
Recessed.
a handful of actually people.
Not many.
Go outside and play in the schoolyard.
I don't mind it, but I just wanted to,
My neighborhood, they
you know
used to
what it
take
is,
the
there's,
merry-go-round.
with everything we discussed, and all the angles,
I know.
there's like,
We're here to have.
you know, yeah, I appreciate it. There's,
Ridiculous. Without that big ball bearing, it would not function.
Some of these chairs upstairs.
Yeah, I know. I think I probably took a reset.
These might go longer.
Yeah.
Get up.
That's a world of banking.
You see?
Changing.
Everybody's looking for loans for something these days. It is.
Jumping now.
Although,
Rates going up, they
yeah, although a lot of times, sometimes it might be people that you wouldn't expect to be looking for loans or things you wouldn't expect to be looking for, which also can kind of worry you. You know?
yeah.
I think people might be overextending themselves or trying to chase money that they wouldn't otherwise be trying to make in a certain way. But you know, when everyone,
Did we make that mistake?
I mean, I think we make that mistake every year. So I don't think that mistake will ever stop being made. But yeah, you know, I mean, it just takes more vetting, more time, more meetings to book, you know, the same amount of loans or marginally more. Yeah. It's tough though. It's a tough balance. You know, it's like if you had to shoot somebody down who wanted to become a member of the yacht club, whatever reason, like, oh, you know, you tried really hard. Thanks for taking all the time and everything, but we just can't help you out. I mean, a little different in your shoes, like constantly people coming in and you give them the rundown and I think they leave. You know, you're like, please get all the information that we need and, you know, submit a full application and, you know, you rarely hear back from them because they're like, well, that wasn't as easy as I thought. You know, but,
Just like filling out a credit card application.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, some banks are already willing to wear Cape Cod Fives. It's like they're very highly scrutinized internally from the top down. So, which makes them, you know, it's been around for 160 years, and our, you know, capital ratios are great, and our delinquency ratios are great. Auditors love us, so that's good. You know, like all of our clients are really good clients. You know, they love us and we love them because you know we work so well. But it's the, you know, questionably secured, limited experience, kind of not putting all the effort in up front, just looking for money to start something that might work out based on a name, and you know, that gets tough. So, and there's such a plethora of state and federal subsidy programs now. You know, I mean, we've got the SBA that'll guarantee loans. You have the U.S. Department of Agriculture, all these other security enhancement kind of entities that you can get involved too. But it's like usually people pay a fee up front so that you know the borrower will pay a fee up front to get somebody to provide this enhancement that'll then allow us to make the loan, you know, so then it's like, well, we
Do you have a
don't,
lot of agricultural subsidies?
not so much, but you'd be surprised what what they'll guarantee a loan for, like pretty much any kind of public interested, any kind of business expansion, any kind of startup, as long as it's in a rural area, they'll pretty much cover anything the SBA will.
Wow.
Yeah, and Nantucket and the Cape, the Cape Islands are all considered rural by the definition of the word, so, I mean, yeah, they won't do straight working capital lines of credit, which on Nantucket are so common because you know, they're either like
It's just the
the
seasonality.
seasonality of it's big, and in the trades they're big for working capital gaps. But okay, you're saying
We've had a line of credit for years and years and years, which we brought over from Pacific Bank.
yeah,
Although the good news is they haven't touched it in 2 years.
yeah. You guys work with Rob Reisman, right? Yeah, he's a stud. That guy.
Oh, he
He's got
knows.
some huge-
Straight shooter, 5 for question, just good.
Yeah, I know. He knows like clockwork.
Yeah.
Mr. Worth?
It's in there. I like that. It's like an apothecary bottle.
It's in your picture. Looks original. People never stop.
Well, you can always use like 2 years off around your age. Pardon me?
Get it paid for.
You work for a prosperous institution. Just pitch them.
Yeah, they're sending me to a program like that. It's a 2-year program. That's not that.
My dad used to go to Baptist certainly was a Polaroid.
I'm gonna have the two of you, I'm gonna have you lead our portion this side of the discussion, so the two of you. Is that okay? Yeah, I'll get us going.
Oh, okay.
Did you go out there?
Yes,
What'd you think?
it was nice. I mean, I'm not a...
Did you sign up?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of a haul, but it was all right.
Yeah. Any sense of how many of the residents were long-term?
There's 4 sections. One's for rehab,
Yeah, yeah.
and so there's basically three sections are basically long-term.
Yeah. That's the only way you can actually break even,
Right.
make any money, is in rehab.
Right. Which we would compete with the hospital.
Yeah. Yep. Hi, Steve. Oh, nice.
That must be yours.
Somebody left it here.
We're going to Montreal.
You should. Anything that writes is a good thing.
I said you might ask why Montreal. It's cold, it's Christmas, it's French. We're all looking for a
You have your name tag already? Name tag already?
It's not spelled right, but.
That's all right.
How did they spell it?
No, they're missing the C.
They missed the C.
That's okay. People have their.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly right.
They didn't completely butcher it.
This over here.
That's all right, you're in my way.
I'll trip myself on my cord. That's my fear.
Chris, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Thanks for that. I'd seen your email when I saw it. Oh, yeah. Well, the one missing the. And I probably should recuse myself from the some of all the CBC. I think you can listen to it when the bill votes. if you make sure your microphones are on. It being 4 o'clock, we will commence our meeting, Finance Committee, for Monday, the 19th of December. First, is there any public comment? Seeing none. Let me actually also remind you that you're getting both audio and video, I suspect, so behave yourselves. We'll behave ourselves. We have minutes in our packet. Any comments on the minutes? Entertain a motion to approve.
I don't have the page in front of me, but as I was reading it, I saw that Mr. Sanford was referred to as Mr. Henry on at least one occasion. Small change, but so nobody's looking back through thinking we didn't include somebody who attended the meeting.
That's a good catch.
But if we could make that change wherever it appears, then I'd make a motion to approve.
So it would be as amended.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Before we jump into the CPC, Cliff, could you, you're serving on the Island Home Work Group. Would you mind giving us a 3-minute, 5-minute, no more than 5-minute summary of where you are?
Yes. Well, just recently we took a trip to Mary's Meadows in Holyoke, Mass. And visited a long-term care facility, which is basically built and, I'm going to say, sponsored or supported by the Catholic Church in that area. It's more of a spoken hubs type system where there's 4 separate, smaller, they're like 10 rooms to a facility where it's more of a homey type atmosphere. We posed a lot of different questions, got a lot of different answers, and we're taking that information and implementing it into our work group. I think the biggest problem we have right now with the work group is trying to get the consensus of both the work group and the Board of Selectmen as far as our mission statement, and we're working forward with that.
Okay. So I think we're going to talk about our schedule later on, but I have put because I think it may show up as a separate warrant article from the selectmen. We're going to hear specifically about our island home. I know it's in your capital plan, so I'm sure you'll reference it, but I think sometime in January, right before the warrant comes from the selectmen, we're scheduled to have a discussion about our island home with its own focus. So to the extent that the work group is heading towards a calendar date, I would say that by the 3rd week in January, we, the Finance Committee, will hear from the town specifically about our island home.
Okay.
So anyway, great. Thanks very much. Ken? Wherever is most comfortable for you, but probably, are you all set, okay, to stand up, and
Sure.
or would you prefer to?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Good morning. Good afternoon. As in the past, the CPC has...
excuse me, just identify yourself and your
sorry.
role here.
Ken
Yeah, thanks.
Bogran, the chairman of the Community Preservation Committee. As in the past, the CPC has invited applications for funding under the Act, and this year we received 20 applications. 19 of them fit within the guidelines of the Act. One of them did fit within the guidelines, but they didn't have the material necessary for us to be able to act on it, as it was from a for-profit that was establishing a nonprofit. It was the Richmond Group. and they had not established the nonprofit. So we were not able to consider their application because the funding that they were requesting could not have been funded. So we acted on the 19 different applications in the 3 different categories. We had hearings with all of the applicants in terms of expanding on their detailed application, and then we had 4 days of deliberations because we had applications requesting in excess of $7.2 million for funding under the Act, and at the end of the day we had $2,618,500 available from the various sources that are eligible for our funding. In the material that I forwarded to you, we have made the recommendations in the 3 categories: historic preservation, community housing, and open space and conservation, as well as the same funding for the administrative costs of running the CPC. This year, the committee felt that community housing was probably the most critical need within the community. And as you can see from our recommendations, the major portion of the funds that we had available were allocated to the community housing category. We put the minimum amount of funds into open space because, in fact, that is most appropriately looked at after with other organizations here on the island. And in the area of historic preservation, we have followed our past pattern in terms of following through on projects where possible, where funding is available, where we have worked with the organizations as to the preservation project. In the area of historic preservation, we had two new candidates this year. The Nantucket Island School of Design and Arts, where we allocated $132,856 to the preservation and restoration of the 2 silos and the stabilization out at the Long Barn out in Wawinit. Those are the only remaining silos on the island, and they will be able to have a significant amount of community use once they are stabilized and restored. We also, for the first time, provided some funding to St. Mary's Church. I think it was the last church that had not come to us with respect to restoration and preservation of historic materials. This year also, after having not agreed to funding the town of Nantucket DPW, we did provide funding for some funding for the restoration and the erection of the base of the pole in Sconset with respect to that part of historic preservation. The other amounts of allocations were significantly reduced amounts based on their requests, but they were to projects that were ongoing that we had funded in years past. In the area of community housing, this year we made the major contribution was our recommendation for the allocation of funds to the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We were following the lead of the town last year with respect to the $1 million allocation to provide funding for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And we also sent a letter of recommendation to the Board of Selectmen asking that they, in fact, replicate that allocation this coming year and, in fact, increase it if possible, because affordable housing is perhaps the most significant community need at this point in time, based on the indication that we're getting from the community and all the requests that we're getting. The other allocations that were similar, there was one new one, and that was to Halkeen Management, and it's for the start of the restoration of the windows in the Academy Hill apartment building. Now, Halkeen is an independent, not-for-profit, but in fact, we felt that this was appropriate because the town gets this building back at the end of the lease. In addition, in this category, this was the 3rd or 4th payment on the bond that was authorized for the balance of the Sachem's Path infrastructure. And in the area of open space, there was a new allocation this year, small amount to Linda Loring Foundation for the things that we were able to fund. They had requested equipment, but we're not able to fund equipment with respect to the funds that are available to us. And we did an additional small amount to Sustainable Nantucket with respect to the community farm out in Cisco. And those are basically the changes with respect to stuff that we hadn't done in the past. It was a difficult process in coming down to the numbers because what we had to do is get rid of 2/3 of the funds that were requested and still try to allocate as much as we could to housing, but also to try and make sure that other projects that were started had the opportunity to move forward. So I'd be happy to answer any questions with respect to the specific allocations from any of the members.
Great, thank you. Questions? Peter?
Ken, just a question on the number of windows at Academy Hill. How many does that represent, that 250,000?
It represents, I think there are 3 or 4 windows that are going to be done on the first floor that they're going to be able to do. And the reason that we did that was because those windows are unable to be opened and to be functional at all. And we felt that, and these were the ones that we could do without them having to go in and put the rigging up to be able to do the upstairs windows. And based on the estimates and the contractors we talked to get some advice, they suggested that the pricing for this was really very, very reasonable with respect to what needed to be done. Because basically, what happened is that the frames of the window have all been rotted out, and so they've got to really effectively replace the exact windows. But these are not off-the-shelf windows, as you know, as you walk by Academy Hill.
So that those windows are surrounded by bricks. So I'm assuming there's
Yep.
some of the material has to be taken out before the window,
Yeah,
the new window
that's
be
correct.
put in.
Yeah.
So what is that, like $80,000?
I don't remember. I
Right.
asked David if he wanted me to bring all the detail, and I didn't bring it with me. So I can get that information for you if you want. But
Was it
don't-
with the reason to replace those? Was it life safety? Was it they were non-functional? Was it
Well,
were they
it
leaking?
was 2 things. It was a safety thing, and it was a non-functional, but it was also in terms of starting to preserve the building, because in
Yeah.
fact, with the rotting, with what was happening, there was a real concern that it was going to have an impact on the stability of the building itself.
Great, thank you, sir.
Cliff?
As far as us paying for it, or the CPC paying for it, whoever pays for it, was that not part of their lease to repair and maintain the building to get out of control, or is it all part of their?
No, we were satisfied that this was not part of their responsibility in terms of what their lease required them to do.
I just happened to have that. I thought it was part of Chapter 7, Section 7, but we can talk about that some other time. But okay.
Well, I think this is the time to talk about it. Why did you determine that maintenance of the building was not under their responsibility per the
Because
lease?
this was a capital item as opposed to a maintenance item, Steve.
Right, but, I mean, the lease is such that they own everything on the property until the end of the lease, so they're responsible for all upkeep.
I'll have to go back and come back to you with an answer to that question in terms of our determination relative to that.
Okay. I think it's worthwhile.
So you do, that'd be one question to come back.
Yep, I will.
We'll come back around, and I'll let you know when we're planning on making motions on this. Cliff?
Sachem's Path, I've lost track of it. We just seem to, it's been a never-ending
Well,
funding.
the reason for this last funding on our part was that they came back to us with respect to the infrastructure for Phase 2. And the estimates that came back this year with respect to the cost of doing that were significantly higher than the estimates that they had last year. And so they came back to us with an amount that was about double of what we are allocating to them. And what we did was we said we were prepared to be able to commit this in order to, because we have to have the infrastructure in place before the building permits can get started. But we've told them that anything above this, which is a shortfall, that they're going to have to do, and they're going to have to take out of the amount that they're allowed to be allocated as a nonprofit to make profit on this venture. And they've agreed to do that. So.
Chris? Who owns the Higginbottom House? I should know this, but is that NHA or is that the town own that?
Who owns which?
The African American History Museum?
That is the Museum of African American History. It's a nonprofit based in Boston. And
It's its own not-profit. It's not NHA?
No,
it's not
It's a
NHA.
nonprofit.
Just curious about that. Thank you. And on the Affordable Housing Trust, where it talks about obtaining the approval from the commissioners for each
Yes,
project?
what we did was we worked with town council because the CPC has a legal obligation to report to the DLR that the funds that are allocated are spent in accordance with the approval at town meeting. And so what town council suggested was is that before they expended any funds with respect to the nature of the project, they needed to come to us to get approval for the nature of the project, not with respect to the dollars and cents, but the general amount and the nature of the funding.
And that's to make sure that it conforms with your guidelines?
With what we're allowed to do with respect to, because in the Act itself, Section 5 of the Act has a one-liner that says that funds can be allocated to an affordable housing trust fund. It has no other restrictions with respect to it. In Section 6 of the Act, where we're responsible for reporting to the DOR with respect to what the funds actually were sent on, there are specifically detailed requirements. And so in terms of working with town council felt that this was the best way to be able to, allocate the funds so that they have some flexibility in terms of what they're trying to do, because we can't anticipate anything all things that might happen, but also that they would have to come back and get permission to do it so that we could be satisfied that it's within the criteria of what we're able to fund under the Affordable Housing.
But the discussion was largely that if it fit within the criteria, it would be approved. There
That's
wasn't any
correct.
more, we
And
like this, we don't like that kind of
We
thing?
were not going to try to second guess what they were trying to do. All we were concerned about was that it was within the framework of what the funds for affordable housing are allowed to be used for. Okay.
Thanks.
And did you, excuse me, just as a follow-up, did you get anything from the trust in terms of projects or
At this point in
programs?
time, no, they haven't. They have not talked to us about any specific projects. They have talked about having the ability to have the funds to be able to move on stuff, which is a problem that's been there in the past in terms of they've become aware of certain things that they might be able to get, but if they didn't have funding, they weren't able to move on them and make an offer for a piece of property, for instance, or to accept a donation to be used for affordable housing.
Peter, you want
Kind of a deep, specific question, Ken. Knowing that most of the charitable organizations are 501c3s, has any of those established a C4, which is anybody who donates money to a C4 because they have a historical facade, it's a tax deduction in a different sense, and it really does help out and go a long way where it doesn't meld with the C3's normal business. And if not, I would suggest that you probably on the CPC or somebody should get a good tax attorney to look into that, because it's very much beneficial as long as they are a deemed federal historic building. And it just talks about the facade, the outside of the edifice.
I'm not aware of anybody doing that, but that's something that we will explore, because in fact, historic preservation is one of the three areas that we have spent a fair amount of money over the years.
Yeah, we should. Ironically, in private club world, a lot of the older buildings that house private clubs are indeed, even though they're private clubs, they're historic, And a lot of those companies or those not-for-profits have established those C4s, and their members or constituents have been able to provide lots of money, which they do get a write-off.
Okay.
Two questions. The $45,000 for the flagpole and sconset, I'm assuming that insurance wouldn't pick that up, or is this unrelated to somebody plowing into it?
This was probably the most discussed award with respect to the committee. It is clearly designated for the restoration and the erection of the base of the pole, all right? Not with respect to the rest of the pole, not with respect to any of the problems with the nature of the wood, the nature of the pole, or anything like that. But we felt that this was, it ended up being that this was what felt that we wanted to be able to help the town with this, because in fact it wasn't covered by insurance. It was covered by a problem with respect to it not having been done right the first time. So hopefully it was going to get done right the second time, and to never come back to the money with respect to the Wisconsin flagpole.
Thank you. And my second question, in carryover from year to year, are there unspent funds that have been allocated that have not been spent? I guess, and the other side of that question, or the entities that are being given this money, are they moving through and actually...
What we do each year, David, is we go out to the existing organizations and see what's still out there, see where they are in the process, and if they're finished, we collect money back. If the project has fallen by the wayside, last year we got a big thing back, but that is stuff that's monitored, and there are right now there's nothing that was able to come back this year, and almost all the projects. There are no big projects sitting out there with a lot of money waiting to be moved forward. The only areas where they are is one is in habitat in terms of they're moving forward, but they're always moving forward. And in housing Nantucket, there was a timing problem with respect to some of the timing of the monies that Ann Cuspa had gotten there. But those were the only two areas where there were any dollars sitting out there. And that's part of the reason that we got back on the award to Housing Nantucket this year, because in fact they still had money out there. But there's nothing on the horizon sitting there that is not going to go forward or is waiting to come back.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, okay.
Ken, what's the trend in terms of your funding sources going forward? I mean, what's the expectation of what you're going to be able to do going forward?
Well,
future years?
That's a question that's really very, very difficult to answer, because we have two principal sources of funding. One is the 3% surtax on the real estate tax here locally, and the second is the state match. In the projection for this year, we significantly reduced the amount of state match because, in fact, a fair number of other communities have enacted the CPC, and so it has reduced the amount of funding. We were hopeful that this year that there would have been a bigger amount because, in fact, in the state budget, there had been $50 million that had been put in the budget, but it was subject to the budget having a profit, the state having a profit, and that didn't occur. What the coalition is doing is meeting with the legislators to try to figure out how to be able to get a better source of ongoing renewable funding with respect to this, because in fact many communities across the state have realized what a benefit this is in terms of addressing these three areas. And so part of what I think is going to happen is that in the bulk of the funding has come from fees with respect to real estate transactions, fees on mortgages, stamp duty, and that sort of stuff, and that hasn't been updated in about 20 years. So part of what the coalition is talking to the state about is to seeing whether or not those can't be increased a small amount so that with the volume of transactions, it will have the possibility of generating significant additional dollars. And that's a real concern because, in fact, Boston decided to, after almost 15 years, decided that the CPC was a very, very good thing to be able to have. And so certain parts of Boston, Cambridge, have in fact enacted the CPC. We as a community have received close to $12 million from the state over the last 15 years of funds that we would never otherwise have received had we not enacted the CPA here early on. But it's a question that there's not a clear answer to. I mean, we're clearly going to have somewhere in the area of $2 to $2.1 million from the CPC surcharge. That we, unless there's an issue with respect to the valuation of all of the properties and taxes going down. But with respect to the additional funds that we're going to be able to get from the state, that's gone down from 100% match in the early years to about an 18% match we estimate for this coming year. And we're not sure, we're hopeful that that's going to be there. And the only area where we have really any real reserves is in the area of open space, because we have to allocate 10% of each year's funding to each of the three categories: historic preservation, community housing, and open space. Obviously, we have historically almost always only used the 10% for the open space category, because there really isn't a lot to be able to do with respect to open space. So that's the area. And so what's happened is that, for instance, a couple of years ago, when the need came up for buying the federal land out in Nantucket, we were able to allocate close to $700,000 to be able to help with that, because in fact that's there in reserve. I think we're in somewhere in the $400,000 to $500,000 of reserves in the open space category. Again, they have expanded it in terms of allowing it for recreational use, and so that's something that we as a community can think about, and if there, and actually the Finance Committee acts with respect to recommendations to us. So I guess this is something that town is thinking about with respect to potentially recreational space. That's an area that you can come to the CPC at, because that's an area where we do have funding to be able to do that. And it's no longer, it used to be that we had to give 10% to real open space before we could do recreation. Now it's within that same category, it could be all recreational use as opposed to have it for open space.
Great.
Thanks.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is open space defined as something you can walk on, or could you also define open space as water resources?
Henry, I don't know the answer to that. It has historically been something you could walk on, but I don't.
Seeing how much open space we use recreationally in water.
Well, no, I understand. It's a good question.
Okay.
I'll take a look and see if we can find an answer to that.
Surely we could find some use for those funds if it did apply to our harbor.
Well, part of what we're doing this year is we are funding a study by the Preservation Institute to document the historic Nantucket waterfront and vulnerable areas, to be able to utilize that to preserve those areas against flooding or high tides and stuff like that. So and that was deemed to be an appropriate use of the funds. So the area of water as open space is something to explore.
Okay, thank you.
Cliff?
I don't know if you already said this. How many more years is left on the bond for the field?
I think it's 6. Was
it 10?
It was a 10-year bond,
okay.
and Cliff, we paid down for the first 3 years. We paid down $125 each year, okay, and because the bond wasn't issued, and this is the first year the bond was issued, second year.
So when we permanently borrowed it, they had 3 years, so instead of taking it out 10, we paid down and took it out for 7. So that, because they had already collected the 125 for 3 years, so instead of permanently borrowing the full, I don't remember, just $1 million for the discussion, we only permanently borrowed $700,000 and paid down the band to that point, and then
remind you is on the bond for the affordable housing. That was an $800,000 bond.
Great. Any audience comment? Anybody want to make a comment? No. All right, Ken, thanks very much. Just to let you know, and you'll get an email from me right now, we're scheduled to, on the 10th of January, because you came in as a citizens article, we're scheduled to do our final reviews and take motions on the 10th. But you'll get an email from me telling you about that. So.
All right, and the only thing you want is detail on the hurricane.
That seems to be the question that the committee has. So if you could provide that to me, and I will disseminate it. And so thanks very much.
Good.
Appreciate coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the discussion of our capital program, and I'll turn to Christy. And Peter McEachern is our representative on the capital program. So, Peter, I'm going to let you be the Finance Committee's voice, and it's your show.
Well, I think with all the hard work that the committee and of course especially Christy has put into this presentation, I'd love for Christy to go first, and
Sure.
I'm sure there'll not be need for a second, but I'm here if need be.
Thank you. Christy Kickham, Chair of the Capital Committee. Just want to thank the Finance Department, Town Administration, the committee members for the time they've put in. A lot of information back and forth, as well as the department heads. We did have some follow-up discussions with them and phone calls and visits, so they helped us in that respect, which we appreciate. Let's see here. You'll notice on the report, items in red were discussed and ultimately moved based on our discussion. There's an item on page 13 I just want to point out, which is the upgrade to the wastewater facility. That should be in red. That was taken out, and it's going to go in the operating fund. So the document, we've got just the executive summary, just gets the document started. Little introduction. Move on to our all of our recommendations with some narrative, and we're happy to try to elaborate on that. Towards the back, Brian has supplied us the spreadsheet for the funding sources. And then in the back, there's a spreadsheet that Peter had worked on that we're going to use going forward as something we can base our future recommendations on. And if he wants to elaborate on that, he can do that. That'd be fine. So aside from going through each one, I think I'm hoping you guys had a chance to look at it. And Finance Committee always has some good questions for us. So if there's a question I cannot answer, I'll maybe if one of my committee members recalls the discussion, they can help out, or Finance Department. But happy to go through the document and answer any questions you might have.
If I could, just for the Finance Committee's understanding, we've gone from close to $141 million in both general funds and the enterprise funds. That was our first number for our capital. And we removed, or I should say the voters removed, $80 million for the sewer project. Then we pushed just the our Island home off to the side for a little bit. That was 37.5. So when you really get down to the numbers we were looking at, we're now in the 17.4 million between general funds and the enterprise funds for capital. And part of the process, when we are looking at these, is we're not just looking at the year 2018. We're looking 10 years out. We're actually even going backwards a few years just to figure out how did we get to where we are. And I know that the committee is not done yet. We have another meeting scheduled for January where we're trying to, as we started, we have a lot to finish on, create some additional procedures or policy concerns that we had, looking for more information from the department heads, which will free up a lot of their time. If we ask for certain items prior to presentation, we feel that that could save the department heads a lot of time management. This year, as Christy mentioned, there's something that the Capcom group did, which hadn't been done before, I don't think, is all of us went on field trips, went to each of the entities, went to the departments, asked some of the same questions, but and when you're at that place or that, for example, DPW, you can see specifically what they're referring to. We also took Brian's software sheets that he gives us, his application software, and we converted it into an Excel just because it was easier to manipulate. That's a accounting word, Brian. Manipulate the figures so we could see what we're looking at sometimes instead of just looking at a PDF. And I think going forward, we'll continue with that. We also categorized each of the items as, is it a new item? Is it a replacement item? Is it potentially, will it cost an employee if we buy this, or will it save us an employee if we buy this? Trying to look into much more detail each of the items. And I think everyone brought to the meeting, there was no rubber stamps for sure. Everyone brought a different thought process. They come from a different trade or walk of life. Some of us are, can bang nails, and some of us can count money and maintain buildings. So I think we have a very, very diverse group of individuals on the committee, and enjoyed working with them. So it's not just the material that you have tonight that you're looking at. Once again, just to iterate, forthcoming in January, we're going to meet and finalize and come up with some other procedures to provide to Brian and Libby and to all the department heads so that some of the answers can be provided beforehand. And with that, please.
Yeah, and if I may add, a lot of those bullet points on page 17, those came out of our meetings, to try to make improvements for next year. So we're committed to making the process a little more in-depth on our part, and having a better understanding well prior to that first meeting with our first department head on what we're getting into, as well as the request for that year, as well as the request going out 10 years. So
I think and what we're trying to do to be helpful, not to be a hindrance, but to be helpful, is that when a department manager, and I would say 95% of the time, a department manager of the town of Nantucket provided a number that had clear backup. Could be an email, it could be a pro forma, it could be a potential invoice, but back up to the figures that they availed. There were certain occasions where there was not backup, and sometimes those type of numbers get people into hot water very quickly, because when you put a number, let's use a number of $200,000, and you just throw it on a piece of paper and say that's what it's going to cost us, $200,000, and then it comes back and it's $600,000. Well, everyone starts shaking their heads and asking themselves why. And of course, it could go the reverse way too. It could go from $200,000 down to $100,000. So that's one of the things that we're going to stress for in going forward, is just to get as much detail without overburdening. That way, the number doesn't get scrutinized and falls in line with our budget process. So I think that's very important.
Yep. So with that, I think if there's individual questions on specific items, I'll do my best to try to give you an idea where we're coming from as far as our recommendations concerned.
Joe? Christy or Peter, in years past, the Capital Programs Committee has put all this in the context of kind of what happened the year before, as well as a 10-year projection going forward. Did that happen here? And I guess I'd be curious, as opposed to, at this stage, individual projects, to know how the $6.8 million or so, if you take out the Our Island Home, the general fund looks like $6.8, $6.9 million. How does that compare to what was allocated and approved last year? And what's kind of the trend going forward, since that is kind of capital and equipment for general operation? And then I'm curious about the same thing for the other enterprise funds.
Yeah. I guess if I could, one of the exercises that we did is 2 years ago, actually December of 2014, the 2018 capital budget, which was obviously a couple of years out, had 29 line items in that year, 2014, for 2018. And when we received our first run of this 2018 capital budget, it was up to 60. So right there, you could look at it and say, well, we doubled. We doubled the request doubles. So is there continuity, consistency? Did things break? Did we decide to go ahead and buy a bunch of other things, or at least budget for those? So looking into a little deeper, out of the 29, 14 items today of the original 29 ended up in the 60 that we have in front of us, or had in front of us. So it showed within that 2-year span that there was a lot of change within those numbers. I, for one, and just one committee member, and I know there's a few who also had maybe the same thought, that to look forward may be difficult now when there's so much change within 2 years. I know that one of the members on the committee asked a question about capital assets and buildings, and how many buildings do we have, and how much monies are earmarked to, or for each and every building the town owns. Well, first we have to have a list of those buildings, which we're getting, and then we'll look at the assessed value of those buildings, so we can then determine if a request is made to spend $10 million on a building that's worth $2 million. Well, that would obviously be one way of just making a decision amongst the capital committee. So fact gathering and tidying up some of those numbers going forward. I think right now, to look more than 2 years out, what are we looking for? Where there's so much change, and I feel that it would be, it should be what we should be doing and firming those numbers up, and that's why we're meeting in January to get to some more policy and procedure, so those numbers can be budgeted, and we can say it's in a plan. So to talk about monies, specific questions about something previous? For example, we looked at the sewer. Went from 25 million 2 years ago to 80 million. Our island home went from 15 million to 37.5. So those are two major jumps in 2 years.
I agree, but the sewer projects were in the capital program, the 10-year capital plan of, I'll call it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I was on the capital program committee.
Correct.
And at least gave you a perspective that, I'll pick on Bill, the police department thinks they're going to, sorry, Bill, the police department thinks they're going to need this much, this much, this much, this many cars, this many, whatever the hell it is. And I guess just looking at these numbers, I don't have any perspective as to whether the $6.8 million for the general fund capital spending is that $2 million more than last year? Is it the same as last year? $3 million. Okay, that's good news. But you don't. That would be helpful, and it would be helpful to have the department heads and the enterprise funds best guess, even if it jumps all over the place, that in fiscal 16 or fiscal 17, now we think we have this 10 years projection of what we're going to have to build or buy or repair.
So we do have that 10-year, but if you want me to say that those numbers are going to be where they are, of course I would say we can't. But there is a plan. Do the numbers equal the plan? I don't know. Chances are no.
Okay.
Brian, do we have a category on the town's balance sheet for depreciation, annual depreciation?
No, it's not. It's a gap adjustment in the audit. It's not. We don't have to report it.
What?
We maintain it, but we don't have to.
And do you know what that number is roughly?
That's what I don't know off the top of my head.
North of 10 million, south of 10 million?
Accumulated, probably north of 10 million.
Annual.
Annual basis? I'd have to look. I don't know.
It seems to me a policy that might, as a starting point, might make good sense for the town, which is that we at least fund capital to the tune of whatever we're depreciating our property, plant, and equipment. That would be a fairly standard metric on the private side. And I think another observation I guess I would make, and perhaps goes out to the Board of Selectmen, which is and I don't know whether it would be helpful to you all or not, but for, some sort of budget charge be given in the beginning that, we're going to spend $7.5 million in capital now, figure out how best to be spent. This looks much more like a bottoms up. Everybody comes in with their requests, and then you guys have to go through and parse it and say yay or nay, and then try to figure out how it's going to get funded.
I would say most definitely it would be much more helpful if we at our first meeting or prior to our first meeting had a number on what we can maintain and what we can fund and what we can speak about in specific when we look at the items, because we really don't have that. I mean, that number, what did it come up, Brian, 2 weeks ago or a week ago? I mean, even it jumped even last week, which I'm sure was a surprise to some of the cap program committee members. And that would help. That would help us at the beginning if we knew exactly what we could afford, set direction right away, and prioritize.
Jim, is that a policy decision that the board would be willing to take in the beginning of the budget? If you'd like.
It's a question.
It is a question.
So would you just repeat the question? I was looking at something else.
So the question is, would the selectmen, as a matter of policy, be willing at the start of the budget season to specify a target capital budget rather than doing what we are doing, which is building it up from the bottom as a result of people bringing in their requests?
No, understood. I think what the process the board has used is to ask the town administration to come up with their capital expenditure requests. Certainly one of the sources of that is free cash. I understand the question about depreciation and that comment, certainly. So I think, so we have, my understanding, we haven't been giving that. The Board of Selectmen's not been doing that. We can always make changes and adjustments to that budget process going forward, and I'll certainly take that comment into consideration as we go about it next year.
I mean, it seems to me it provides guidance that helps, squish down
I don't disagree, and those are always looking for ways to improve the budget process, so I think we'll be happy to think about that as we get other comments from other sources. That'd be great.
Okay, great, thanks.
Peter or Christy, maybe, I don't know who wants to take the question, but can you tell me how much scrutiny was put toward the growth in line items? Over 2 years, you went from 29 to 60, 15 of the original 29 fell off, and only 14 were left. My experience with the Capital Program Committee is very limited, but I always understood that we had budget summaries 5 years out, and then we had years 6 through 10, and we were supposed to be able to see these expenses, coming down the pike, so to speak. Why do things change so wildly? Is this a situation you think will continue? I mean, is that model that we had tried not a good one?
I guess I'll take a shot at it. Some of the items that we brought to the committee, and it's in front of you now in the report, and as Christy said, we're going to be meeting again and finalizing and adding to these lists. One of them may be just like if your item number changes by 10%, then you've got to have supporting evidence that explains why, or don't bring it. Because we did see a few that were wildly off without backup, and part of that backup is, once again, we'll have a request that says, give us a letter from the provider of that Ford truck, and if it has a number on it, that's good, and if you can back that up, that's even better, because if you don't come with that pricing, then the item will just be excluded from the budget going forward until you can actually provide backup. The big ones that changed, And that's why we put them in an Excel spreadsheet so we could see the differences. Right now, we were working with PDFs, just pieces of paper that you could not really, unless you were holding all 20 of them up at once, could discern. So we put it into Excel so we could see the differences, the deltas on those items. And that's the first time that we've done that. So going forward, we'll get much more in detail because day one, the department head will provide that detail or else it cannot be part of our budget that we're looking at, and that's what we hope.
Yeah, and a lot of those big items, those initial numbers, there was no accountability to them. So we're hoping to improve on that and create some accountability with those numbers and the 10-year forecast going out. So
if I can just follow up. Keep going. More or equally troubling to the growth in the numbers on the individual line items is the growth of the number of line items. To go from 29 to 60 in 2 years, how much time are department heads putting in these estimations? I mean, are they really only focusing on the next year out, and then just filling in a couple of numbers for the other ones? Because that's not a useful way to budget.
Yeah, honestly, I can't speak on the department. The request from town administration to the department on the information that they bring to the committee. Part of us going through our process this year is one of the improvements is that we're hoping to be more attuned to that and what as Peter said, some more accountability to the numbers going forward. As far as the jump and the increase, I don't know. I don't know if they were holding back items from past years and they're all coming out now, and if next year is going to dip back down. I'm not sure what that is, but I know that we're going to have a much better sense of the past year, some past years, as Joe brought up, and going out years and what the amounts of requests mean. I think we'll have a better sense of that.
Well, just the document that the Board of Selectmen and many people in this room had help on writing the policies and procedures for accounting within the town. I mean, when was that approved? I think mid-November. We took that even in its blue lined and highlighted stage and started looking at it and utilized that document that's now up to speed to go forward with, because it is, who can answer the question, why did it go from 29 to 60? We tried to ask the questions why, and why the item wasn't there, why some items just disappeared. So it actually went both ways. And, our work group, there were some times where we may have had disagreement on an item, but there were many other times where we were actually saying, is there enough money for that item? Because you'd also hate for an item to get passed and approved and be half of what it really should be, because that's just as embarrassing, if not worse. So really the scrutinization has to come from, to take the crutch away that the Nantucket factor always adds 35%. I don't believe in that. I think if you live, work, and operate on Nantucket, you should get your price, and the Nantucket factor should be built into that price. It should go into the budget, and it should be within 10%. And everyone should be fine. We understand things are expensive, but don't use it as an excuse after the fact because your initial price meant nothing, had no value. So I think that's maybe in layman's terms where we're getting at and working with. And I would say that 100% of the department heads worked with members of the committee and the administrators, and that's why there is so many pieces of paper in front of all of us. Hopefully we'll condense that down.
Jim, you had a comment?
So maybe this is a follow-up. One of the town manager made her comment in her budget message. One of the challenges of doing a capital budget she had was in the absence of a strategic plan that's been developed and approved by the board. She had to make certain assumptions about allocation of capital dollars, and it's my hope that for the next budget cycle we'll have that plan in place that will give her, the town administration, levels of priority and ways that we're recommending that funds be spent. So it's just additional comment. Thanks.
So in your, it seems that accountability is a word that comes up, it has been coming up, I know, on the Capital Committee in the past. Do you get a sense that department heads really just aren't, I'm sure some are more accountable than others, so I don't want to, but is that where there's a breakdown, or?
I'm not sure about that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know as if I think there's the idea that we want to sort of get that sense of a 10-year plan in their department and get it in their heads, and so that they can properly make future requests. But I don't think there is. I don't think the structure's there yet for the accountability of those numbers yet, and that's one of the things we're going to try to improve on. If there's any way we could help the departments to do that, but I don't know where that comes from as far as the accountability. I'm not sure, but there's going to be a lot more questioning on future numbers to where hopefully we'll have better ideas what those numbers are. But I'm not sure what if there's a lapse in accountability. I don't know yet.
Well,
I'm not sure where that would be.
If I could maybe, Christy, in a positive way, pick on our chief. Bill had one line item that was over $1 million and had actually a letter from the provider of the fixed asset with the price right down to the penny. And also then the committee took it and asked questions about, well, this is if we were to buy it, what would it cost if we leased it? So we got around in many different facets that one item, and that's providing, backup right from the provider. And that's all we're asking. I think some credibility to a number, and that way we can look each other in the eye and say, this is what it's going to cost. Boom, no questions asked. And of course, that's an item that pretty much every department on the island will utilize in communication. So, and that's simple. It should be simple. Don't mean to make it seem like it's trivial, but it's simple. Back
David,
up the number.
Hopefully with some of the committee's input, we can sort of help the departments sort of take a better look at it with just some of the questioning and guidance on maybe having some accountability in some of those numbers. As Peter said, if there's backup, if there's paperwork on these numbers, then that helps us a lot, and I think it just gives us all a better idea going forward. With these requests, and then it makes when we don't do something for a few years and there's a jump in cost, we can compare it and we will have a better understanding on the big picture.
So this is my 5th year on this committee. Not a particularly long tenure, but we've been having trouble since I've been there, and I'm sure Jim would echo this, and Cliff, perhaps yourself, since you were once here, of just getting the accountability. And I just, it's frustrating that, there doesn't seem to be a good mechanism to drive that home. This is pretty important stuff. I mean, it's in many ways more important than our operating budget because we're constantly facing the pressure of overrides and an ever-increasing tax rate, and not having a good view. And Jim, I applaud you for leading the strategic review and plan, and that certainly will help. But it's real frustrating, and it must be very frustrating to you guys to go out and not find that you've got good information, and that things that were here yet last year are no longer around.
Yeah, I
guess
mean,
they weren't that important.
Yeah, well, I mean, the consequence for the year you're voting on is not approving it if you don't have the proper documentation. But it's hard to do that for out years when you're not exactly voting on that just yet. You're just trying to get some defined numbers down with some backup.
So I won't put you. I'm going to make the statement. I won't put you on the spot. But would there be parts of this capital request that would drop away on the basis of you not getting the kind of documentation that you really had hoped for? So please don't name names, departments, or.
Possibly, yeah. Possibly. I mean, we trust. I think we trust the departments on the requests that they're bringing, that they're much needed for each department. It's our job to apply some of our criteria, which we're fine tuning, and hopefully we'll have intact for next season. But that we it's our job to sort of look at it at that point. But I trust that the departments are bringing forth their needs. Sometimes I struggle with pushing an item out if it's going to be more of a detriment pushing it out, but we don't exactly need it now. The loader's a good example. So I don't know. There's a lot of questioning that goes into it.
Any other questions for Christie? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Cliff.
Unlike police cars where we fund them out of the general fund, I mean, the ambulance fund always buys the ambulance.
The ambulance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it's a capital expenditure, but it's not really in a sense. Should it be in the operating budget, considered an operating budget? Or?
It's not. Under the funding sources, it says there's an ambulance reserve fund.
So that's just...
We show it as part of the plan in the funding sources.
Okay.
Is the ambulance
reserve fund.
The police cars are directly in the Article 8 budget. This is just because we won't necessarily buy an ambulance every single year.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Under the facilities department, the ADA improvements for 2 Fairgrounds Road, the narrative on a lot of these requests that you didn't approve have a comment something like it was moved out of capital request and into the operating budget. This one didn't have a reason. It says it should be refitted to accommodate ADA requirements because it's used by the public regularly, but then you recommended not to spend the money. What was the rationale there?
It's under the $50,000 capital threshold was one item.
So whose budget would this come out of? Plus?
Yeah.
So the majority of those items that are in the facilities piece would actually then just stay in the facilities department budget in Article 8, and they're funded as one-time expenditures by free cash. So the funding source stays the same. We had bundled them and broken down what the specific dollar total for those items were, and the capital program committee felt that it was more appropriate, since each individual one was under $50,000, that we just put them all into the operating budget. And so because we consider them to be one time, we will fund those with the same funding source, being free cash, out of the operating budget instead.
Okay, so this isn't gone. We're just...
No. It just was moved into the operating budget, and we'll fund it through, like I said, free cash through there. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's still capitalized.
Yes, we'd still capitalize those because it's improvements to a building or whatever, all the other ones, yes.
On our island home, if the voters approve a new island home the spring, assuming that it comes forth in the spring town meeting, does that obviate the need for these improvements?
Well, the kitchen and the laundry renovation, the committee felt this was equipment that could possibly be moved to a new facility. Okay. It appeared to be very vital to the operation of the home. Mm-hmm. As far as the draft mitigation, that initially came in as exterior shingling and trim work, which a few of us in the building trades took a walk around the building and feel that the exterior of that building, if anything, they could have had a paint estimate, but that the draft mitigation is better suited for that building based on the unknown future of it. So we felt that was an appropriate number to help with that. It was specifically based on the north wall on that building. Was pointed out, and we're really cautious on this one to recommend that exterior work when we thought it was a little excessive. That number was based on a number previously, and so we just, the committee felt that was one item that the shingles and the trim could easily live out that building in the next 4 years or 5 years, but that we felt it was important to still address the draft issues that they say they're having.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
Brian, would you address, I assume we're not looking at any overrides to fund this. Just talk us through where the money is coming from to pay for this, all these capital improvements, X of the Island Home, which I think everybody understands would be an override.
So on page 36 of the packet, at the bottom, the actual amount of capital items that the committee, in conjunction with town administration, have recommended being funded is $6.8 million. So when we went through and looked for funding sources, we've identified approximately $1.6 million, which could be used from the sale of real estate account. It essentially will close to close that out. When we use that, we have.
I'm sorry, Brian. That's already on the books. That's not.
Yeah, no, that's already money that's in there. Excuse me. When you use the sale of real estate account, we can only use it. We have to look for things that we can. You can borrow for a period of 5 years or more for. You can't just use it for anything. It's got to be for specific purpose of any item that can be borrowed for a period under Chapter 7 or Chapter 8 of Section 7 or 8 of Chapter 44. So we proposed $1.6 million from there. In a review of the prior year capital reappropriations, I think last year we did quite a bit of extensive reappropriations through the capital article. There's approximately $46,000 that we can fund of this capital with reappropriating from other articles because they're closed out and there's remaining funds, or they have solid numbers and they don't need the funding anymore. That is something on a quarterly basis that internally we look at to try to be forecast into the future whether we will have any to be able to use. Free cash was certified at $6.6 million. We've recommended $3.8 million to be used for the capital equipment that's been recommended here. The CPC is funding $45,000 of the recommended $145,000 for the Sconset Memorial, Flagpole Memorial. Capital from operating budget is $738,000, which is part of the 1% annually that we're required to. Then we have the tax levy. We're proposing using $300,000, which will put us very close to the levy limit, but that's what we've proposed. And then ambulance reserve in the amount of $329,000, which is for the ambulance, and then $50,000 to upgrade and purchase the equipment to make one of the other ambulances ALS as well. There's a couple different pieces of equipment that have to be in that ambulance as well for it to be able to be built out at ALS rates once the program is up and running. So we've already started that with this year, so that's a continuation in this in fiscal 18's budget. So all told, from those funding sources, it comes back down to the $6.894 million that is before you today.
So no override.
No overrides whatsoever.
Greatly appreciated, and I'm sure the taxpayers will appreciate it as well. Thank you.
You're
Thanks, Christy and the committee. To those of you that are here on the committee, thank you very much for all your work. So I knew we were going to be done this soon. I would have scheduled more things for us to do to make use of everybody's time. But I did put on the agenda the ability to have a discussion, if one would like, about any of the citizens' articles. Is there anything that you want to discuss, or I'd like to review the schedule with you?
Well, you missed your opportunity to present the helicopter article. If you want to give us a rundown on what that is.
Would you like to hear about it?
I mean, honestly, I don't know what it is. I think I know. It's something about, anyway.
Please note that I am stepping down so I can.
Thank you.
That's okay.
So, David Worth here in a citizen capacity. I put forth a citizens article which would change the use categories across the town's zoning bylaw to prohibit the landing and takeoff of helicopters except for the airport, the hospital or its designated area in the event of an emergency, i.e. the helicopter fails and has to land somewhere, or at the direction of federal, state, or local public safety officials. There's a car accident, you need to land a helicopter on the road to pick people up. It would effectively prohibit the landing of helicopters on residential property. I've done this for a couple of reasons. For those that might follow what goes on in the Hamptons, there's just been an enormous nuisance from helicopters landing in people's homes in the summertime. Well, actually out in the Hamptons most of the year now. And have looked and discovered that many of the southern Connecticut shore towns and the Long Island Sound, Long Island towns have had in place, in some cases upwards to 20 years, ordinances prohibiting the landing and takeoff of helicopters on residential or private property, and they're only confined to the designated areas. This is getting out in front of what I suspect will become, I'll call it an issue here on the island as it continues to evolve with the nature of the people that are coming here. And as I commented to the newspaper, Blade is a purveyor of helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft going out to the Hamptons. They have started to fly here in somewhat of an Uber-like business plan. And while maybe we're somewhat beyond the reach of New York City for helicopters at this point, it was just trying to get out in front of it. So that's the gist of my article. Any questions?
No.
I actually have a question. This says aircraft, not helicopters. And I was wondering if it covers Tuckernuck. Isn't there a landing strip on Tuckernuck?
There is.
There is.
So that, probably just a technical matter, but, or is that meant to cover that as well?
Good question, because I haven't talked to the Tuckernuck people. I would certainly entertain if the Tuckernuckians wanted the ability to continue to use their landing strip, I don't have a problem with it, but...
I assumed that you weren't trying to do that, but the way it was written, I wasn't sure.
No, my Tuckernuck friends would probably be upset. Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments on citizens' articles?
Do we have an outreach to everybody that wanted to be reached? Have we met? I mean, has anybody responded or not responded?
I have heard from Catherine. I have heard from Jeff Allen through you, Cliff, and I've responded back to him. I have heard from Linda Holland, and I think in my schedule I had talked about somebody, I think Gene Grimmer had wanted to hear from Kim Glowacki. So are there other citizens you want to hear from? I took the liberty, Gene sent me an email wanting to do a lot of the zoning yard sale stuff, and I think to some extent it's just her desire to get up to speed on it, but I think we should follow through in our process of having the real estate and yard sale stuff go to the real estate committee. I have spoken with Rhoda Weinman, who's the head of that committee, and I know Libby has sent her a note. They're going to meet in the middle of January, and they will take on all the real estate articles except Catherine's. So they do. Rhoda did not want to be responsible for that. So what I am hoping that we would do, and in the way I've laid out our schedule, is on the 5th of January, so that's a Thursday, that we will invite these folks to come in and talk about their article. So that would be Catherine, Cliff, Linda Holland, Kim Gawacki, and again, if there's ones that you all want to have added beyond that, and then the following Tuesday, I'd like to see us finish our review and take motions on all of those articles so that we can take care of those and move on. Also on that Tuesday, the 10th, I will ask the, it'll probably be Tucker, but the Housing Trust Fund to come in and speak specifically. They have, is it 500,000 in the town in the Article 8?
Yes, there's 500,000 to be given to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
So are you seriously entertaining pulling that out and setting it up as a separate article, or you don't know the answer to that?
I do not know the answer to that. But it is currently built in as part of Article 8 right now.
So my line of thinking on that is that when we go through and do the operating budgets later in the month, that's 500,000. It may be a point that we want to have a more detailed discussion about, because it's 500. There's 400,000 coming from CPC, and there's $1 million that's unspent. So,
well,
and Mr. Kelly just left. So
if we wanted to have a discussion about whether it should be its individual article or whether it should be part of Article 8, probably would have to be done before the warrant before the selectmen accept and adopt the warrant, or else we wouldn't be able to do that. So it would have to be before the middle of January.
I don't.
If you had a feeling one way or the other, I guess is what I was referring to.
Peter?
I know the BOS is meeting with them again this coming Wednesday. So I think they've been on, 2 or 3 of the last agendas?
Yeah, they were on the last agenda to give a presentation on kind of where they are and what their budget might look like the next couple of years.
And they're going back specifically, I think, to Wednesday for the Tacoma property.
Yeah, I think that, what I'm concerned about is that Article 8 gets called by somebody to talk about this, and then we, on town meeting floor, if it were a separate article, we can make a motion on it, and then if there's discussion, we can have it. If not, thoughts?
I think that's a good idea to break it out. All for affordable housing, but I would have liked to have seen something substantial happen with the $1 million they were appropriated last year.
Well, on the 12th of January, we will get an opportunity to have those questions answered. That's my concern, and that's why I set it up to break it out. So that we.
The last selectmen's meeting, just last Wednesday, they had a big discussion on.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So you just heard. I think, is that a consensus of breaking it out?
Definitely.
Yes.
I will bring that consensus discussion back to the town manager.
It's totally up to the town manager and the Board of Selectmen on how they want to do it. Talking about schedule, so on the 5th, we would review the citizens' articles. We would have the proponents of the non-real estate, zoning folks here to have a discussion. It may be the case, we'll set it up so we could also take motions then. Following Tuesday, we would do the Housing Trust Fund, and as I said, those citizens' articles, do motions on those. Then we're off for a little bit over, we're off 2 days to then go into what I've titled appropriation articles. So those are generally articles that have been, they show up every year. We have to make motions on them from a statutory perspective. So that's Health and Human Services. Stephen, you might, are you still on that committee?
Yes.
Waterways, Aviation Fuel Revolving Fund, our ambulance funds, our OPEB contribution, county, perhaps, if you're ready, as we talked. The 12th. Okay. Well, I've got it scheduled further on as well. So, and then stabilization. So the idea here is that we would take all of these appropriation articles and deal with them because they can tend to be able to be dealt with in small chunks. We historically haven't spent, we have some questions about them, oftentimes just to be enlightened a little bit or reminded or refreshed as to what's going on. But I think we can, Brian and I spent some time talking about this. I'm quite confident that in 2 hours we could get through all of those articles. Then we come back on Friday, on the 19th, which is a week later. We'll have the school budget review. Now that's being moved up. Historically, they have done that after the public hearing, our public hearing, but it doesn't, in talking with Mike Cozart and with, why am I drawing a blank? He used to sit here in front of us. Who's doing the, Martin. And talking with them, they're happy to do, once it goes through the school committee, they're happy to come and do their presentation. So I've also scheduled to have our island home called out. We didn't talk about it at all here as part of the capital. I think it's worthy of having a discussion. Since that is a town-sponsored article, it would probably fall on town administration to take us through that. And there may be other selectmen-sponsored warrant articles. We should know about those by then because the warrant I think the warrant will have been reviewed on Wednesday night. So this is the following day. And then on Friday they would deliver the warrant from the selectmen, so we'll get to see the whole thing at once. Then on Thursday the 26th and Saturday the 28th, this is sort of our move, particularly Saturday, to try getting through our budgets in basically over 2 days. So Thursday the 26th, we would do the following enterprise funds, airport and water, and that would be operating, capital, and collective bargaining. I might say that I don't think we're going to have, perhaps collective bargaining agreements will be available, but I don't think that's the case. And it's the policy of the Finance Committee, if they're not available 1 month ahead of town meeting, we will not hear them. So it doesn't look like there's going to be a conclusion beforehand. So we would basically be looking at operating, but this is also a good time to come back to the capital that we just saw and get it in some context from the managers of the enterprise funds. And then on Saturday, starting at 8:30, we will be done at 1 o'clock. This requires both work on the part of the town as well as work on the part of the committee. We will do the general fund budget, which Libby and Brian will be responsible for. And by pulling the housing trust fund, we can have a more detailed discussion about that. Public safety, which Chief Pittman will be doing the presentation. Fire, our fire chief, DPW, and sewer. And again, operating and capital, again, collective bargaining agreements won't be done and available for those groups. So what we're going to do on Saturday, we'll start at 8:30. We'll be done by 1 o'clock. It won't run over 1 o'clock. We'll have a schedule of times, expectation of when we would expect to see the different department heads. So we will follow that schedule so people don't have to sit here all day.
You serving
on the
lunch?
other side. What?
You serving
I
lunch?
will make sure that there is lunch. I will make sure there are the tastiest pastries. And if I can figure out where you can get coffee in bulk, does anybody have, I'm a mainland guy, but what?
Handlebar does those boxes.
Perfect. I thought they might. So I will make sure there's coffee here. And if you're a tea drinker,
bring tea.
Bring your own mug.
The Island Home, you said you're going to have the Board of Selectmen come in for the article for the Island Home?
Well, you see, and anybody else that wants to, but they're the sponsors.
Right. Should we have, seeing the committee was charged with coming up with their philosophy or their recommendations, should we have them also, the chair, come in and give what I guess we have at the time of
I am more than happy to entertain them and let them.
Okay.
But it's important because it is the selectmen's article that town administration, it's a two-part thing, and I understand that, so.
Yeah, it just seems to be, that's the point I was trying to make, is it seems to be competing with the mission given by town meeting, which I would think is the legal responsibility to report, and then the selectmen seem to have a different view of what we're going to do. So I was just hoping by then we'll have a consensus of
That's your job, Cliff. That's why you volunteered. But I thought that rather than we will do our Island Home operating, current operating budget as part of our review. But I wanted, our budget review, but I wanted to make sure that there was appropriate amount of time for people on this committee to ask questions about about the building and the big capital investment that we're faced with. I've reserved Tuesday the 31st for a follow-up from Saturday. I do not think that that's going to be necessary, but Monday the 6th, February 6th, that is the day that we do our public hearing on our warrant. So it's our obligation to take the warrant from the selectmen and go through all the articles and find out if anybody wants to speak to them. And on Tuesday the 14th, the property acquisition, leasing, conveyance, and disposition article and the county budget would be taken care of, and I believe that Rhoda Weinman will be set to come with their comments about those citizens' articles plus any other articles that the selectmen may have. And from there, it's just a sort of a race to get finished with our motions. And I'm hopeful that with the stuff that we do in January, basically, that we'll have heard just about every article. And then once the public hearing has taken place, we're free to make our motions and move forward. Peter.
David, the only meeting that I will not be here to attend would be Thursday, the 19th of January.
Where might you be, Peter?
On business trip.
Thank you.
Have you, David, spoken with Dorothy Hertz, the chair of the Contract Review Committee, about the date for this presentation?
I have not.
We had been operating under the assumption that the date of the presentation would be approximately the same as last year.
Okay.
Last year, we made our presentation on February 9th, which is significantly later. Now, we had many discussions with one of the organizations. It doesn't appear that that's going to be necessary this year, so we could certainly move that up, but the 12th may be too far. So.
Would you...
Yeah, I'll reach out to Dorothy and see what she has in mind.
So let me suggest... so if the 12th is too soon, the 19th is too soon, probably.
And if I may say, Stephen, that a lot of other organizations on Island look towards that committee's results and review to help make their presentations or allocations towards other gift giving and whatnot. So
okay, well let me push for the 12th and stay as close to that date as we can.
If not, I would say the 14th.
The 14th.
Because I think we can slide it. That's shaping up to be a February. It's shaping up to be a fairly light.
I see.
I don't think we're going to have a lot to do there. In fact, we may be able to on the 14th start motions on articles.
Good.
So anyway, and then we may get jammed on the zoning articles just because they're subject to the planning board's whim. I know the 26th of January, Thursday, at 4 o'clock, roughly the same time, at the same time we're meeting, there is their first public meeting, and I don't know how many they're going to get through. And but last year and in prior years, we didn't get stuff from the planning board until right at the very end. So, but I think we didn't determine there was really anything in zoning that we wanted to pull out. I mean, we have the ability to get, at least on the citizen stuff, we haven't seen what the planning board's going to come up with, so, on their own.
Right.
Coming through the selectmen.
So there's nothing that stands out in the same way that the zoning changes and all the associated articles for Richmond Great Point was a few years ago, but we do have a lot of piecemeal density increases, which I think, not maybe on an individual level, but generally I have a opinion about, absent a larger plan or absent the inclusion of these properties in a larger plan. So just make that point again, that I'll want to raise that for discussion and maybe have some sort of a blanket statement for all of those things.
So, in terms of in our motion, making the blanket statement?
I mean, something like the Finance Committee notes that increasing density will have, fiscal impacts on the town's budget going forward, something like that. Certainly we can ask private citizens, and, depending on who you ask, you can't ask developers either to pay for the impacts that development will have on the island. But I do think it warrants consideration, and I think that town meeting needs to know that somebody's at least aware of that, and hopefully we can get the ball moving in the direction of studying what those impacts are.
Well, hopefully our planning board will have some rational approaches to all of this. Anyway, so that's where we are. Tried to cut down the meetings.
Well done.
So I'm pretty confident. The only one that I I'm not nervous about, but it's new, is doing the budgets on Saturday. And again, I would just impress upon, you all as members, to come prepared, because in order to get through this, I'll be probably a little more dictatorial about making sure that we adhere to the timelines. So I think getting the department heads to, I'm pretty comfortable I can get through the 4.5 hours on the Saturday. But I think we owe it to the town department heads who are going to come on Saturday to be efficient and prompt and not drag these things on. And at the same time, through town administration, I've asked that they come fully prepared, and that we don't get we don't sit here and with them not being prepared. So it's got to be a mutual agreement.
David, the expectation is that their presentations are going to be based on sort of an exception, as opposed to, if 80% of the budget, just to pick on, if 80% of the budget is dependent on contract renewal, but I am hiring 3 new people, I expect they're going to talk about the hiring of 3 new people.
Absolutely. So 3 new people, requests over $10,000, and less request. We agreed a request that might potentially, I'm looking at Brian, a request that might down the road lead to a hiring of additional staff that doesn't show up in this current year, but because of decisions they're making, may basically obligate the town to an additional staff person or a major capital investment.
We had said that between 5 and 10, if it would lead to additional permanency of either that expenditure or additional requirements down the road, then we should be prepared to at least discuss it. But the exceptions that would be discussed were over 10,000. Is that the way, or new personnel?
Yep, or new personnel. So that's where we need to focus on, with the idea being that, these budgets have been pretty well gone over by Brian and Libby, with the department heads. They come within, the town will have a balanced budget going in, so we fit within the broad requirements, and this is just to make sure that we understand what's going forward. I can tell you that in some of the meetings that I've had with Brian and Libby, that staff positions were requested. Oftentimes there are additions to unfilled staff positions, so they have been cut out. So I know the number you started at was quite a lot higher than where you ended up.
Well, as part of the budget, it's in excess of 24 positions, which I think was whittled down to, and that includes funding to where some
Julia
alternate
knows the number, 9 point,
to
what?
7.9.
7.9 FTEs,
Yep.
so from something over 20. So, I think as a committee, we ought to feel good about the work that these guys have done, and I think if we focus on the exceptions and understanding those, will add more value to the process for the voters, and we can move through this. So, anyway.
David, if I may. Brian, when would we get numbers?
I've committed to the chairman that you would have them a week before the meetings.
Okay. And David, you have a timed, I think you mentioned before, on that Saturday, you'll have it timed where each department head will know exactly.
I will have a schedule.
Good.
Which I will
And we have
work out.
communicated the discussion points to the department heads as well, so they're
And-
fully aware
So
of what
it's
should be done.
teed up, and if it works, it would be great.
Protein is just as good as caffeine. And
You don't want
keeping
those
you
sticky
awake
buns?
and alert. Sticky buns, well, come on, that's going to 5-minute burst and you're done.
So we'll bring you 2 sticky buns then.
Yeah.
What protein do you want?
I don't know. I can always provide, but then we have to keep it under $75 a person. I'm not sure if I can do that at the Nantucket Yacht Club. Get in trouble by the Commonwealth.
No, we will make sure that there is food and sustenance.
Was I shy in asking?
So, we'll work that out.
Schedule the police chief really early in the meeting, because the training room does have the big sign that says no food or drink.
Are we in the training room?
We are scheduled in the training room.
Upstairs, yeah.
What is going on that's bigger than that? We're going to have all the department heads and all of us, and we can't get this room?
No, I said schedule the police chief first, because the sign on the door says no food or drink.
Right.
I think Stephen's asking
I'm
about the
asking-
availability of this room
Yeah.
Oh, this one here?
They're both available.
They're both.
Oh, okay.
on that Saturday morning. Wow.
Well, here we can have food and drink, right? So when they do the Meet the Candidates and all those events, and they give everybody bottles of water?
Bottles of water, that's it.
Okay.
The glass bottle.
You're going to get more than water, okay?
Does it have to be here?
But, I mean, I don't know how anybody else feels. Maybe I'm the only one. I prefer to be in this room than the training room.
Well, precisely, and I think that one of the things that I would try to do ahead of time is that I think if we did that, set that room up in a horseshoe, it's much more welcoming to anybody that's sitting listening to us. So I really don't want any of us to have our backs to
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah, agreed.
So
But if this room was available?
I'd take this room.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So would you like me to switch it then?
Yes.
Because I think we've already made the reservation, so if this is available, we'll switch this.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so our next meeting is Thursday the 5th, 4 o'clock. I'm waiting for Brian to give room assignments. So what I will do is I will send out this calendar electronically to everybody, and then we'll go from there.
I'll be coming from an audit committee meeting, so I may be a few minutes late.
Okay. So, great.
If I don't show
Adjourn?
Second?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Everybody have a nice holiday.
David, do you have meetings scheduled for Tuesday?
Do I have them for Tuesdays? I have
Not until the 31st.
10th, January 10th.
Because those are, we're going to probably, remember, we usually have to do those at the school, so we'll have to make arrangements